Well, good evening, church, and welcome back to our Wednesday night study, The Names of God. Tonight, we'll look at the name Jehovah-Raah. Jehovah-Raah. Translated to English is the Lord my shepherd. Ra'ah has two primary meanings in the Bible. One is shepherd, and the other is feed. So the translation of the Lord my shepherd can also be translated as the Lord who feeds me. Both are correct, but since shepherding is correct and also includes feeding within the duty of a shepherd, shepherd is the best translation. The Lord my shepherd is only in the Bible 4 times, so let's look at all 4 occurrences and see what we can glean from those. The first instance is Genesis 48:15. Here we have Jacob, who God renamed Israel, of course, the father of the 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of the nation Israel. And he said at the very end of his life, Jacob said, "The God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day." Just a sweet passage at the end of his life where Jacob is recalling all of the times, and I think that's true in life of looking back at being able to see times that we didn't realize in the moment, that we can tell that God was doing things in our life looking back, and Jacob is doing that at the end of his life. The next is in Genesis chapter 49 verse 24. It's Jacob again, and he refers to God as the shepherd, the stone of Israel. I mean, like, God is my rock, but he says, but he is the shepherd and the stone of Israel, recognizing that God not only shepherds him, but also shepherds his family, also shepherds his people. The next is the most famous, and it is in Psalm 23:1, where David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." David doesn't stop there. He only refers to God. He not only refers to God as a shepherd as Jacob does, but he also then describes the function of God as a shepherd. And this is what we'll look at primarily for our lesson tonight. But before we get into that descriptive teaching of David in Psalm 23, let's look at the last instance where God as shepherd is mentioned in the Bible, which is also by David in Psalm chapter 80, verse 1. It says, "O give ear, shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock." And I really only wanted to include that because that's such an interesting statement. I'll say it again and see if you can pick up the interesting part of it. "O give ear, shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock." The interesting part of this is because David refers to the nation of Israel not as the nation of Israel, but as the nation of Joseph, who is the favored son of his father, Jacob / Israel. Joseph took over the care of the nation of Israel after his father died, and enabled all of his brothers and their families, and then is going to become a great nation, to live in the greatest part of Egypt before the Egyptians turned against them. Okay, so let's look deeper at this name of God and what it means. And I'll say it again, as I think I've said in every single one of the lessons, that the name of God isn't just a nice way to think about God or to refer to him. God's names are actually who he is. They are actually who he is. God is not like a shepherd. He is a shepherd of his people. Jesus himself said of himself, John 10:11 and 16, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired man and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired man and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. I love that passage as well. So I wanted to include it. It's such an encouraging passage. Jesus as the good shepherd, same as God in the Old Testament as a good shepherd. And what does the good shepherd do from this passage here in John chapter 10? He lays down his life for the sheep, even to the death. I think that's important. He fights the enemy of his sheep as only he can. He knows his sheep. He has a great intimacy with those who belong to him with his own. And I love this as well. He has other sheep. You know, church, this is the best news for me and you. You know, why would I say that? Because we, not that I know of in our church anyway, we are not Jewish. He's speaking to Jews here in John 10, and he's telling them, you're not the only sheep that belong to me. I have other sheep. And that's us. And praise God. They will become a flock with one shepherd, as Jesus says. The Jews and Gentiles will be brought together as the people of God's pasture. Okay, so let's get to David's description of God as a shepherd back to Psalm 23. Let's read David's description of God together in Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Let's just take this verse by verse. Verse number 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I shall not want, shall can also be translated as do. I do not want. You know, what does that mean? Well, it was like, for me, it was like growing up in a household with my grandparents. When I was with them, there were certain things that were automatic. I was always well fed. I was always clothed. I was always sheltered. And I did not want for anything. And that's and God is so much greater, even better than anyone that we've ever been around that's provided for us. Jesus promises us in Matthew chapter 6:33, referring to those who belong to him, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Or what things will be added to us? All the things that you need, you will be given. But if you first seek his kingdom and his righteousness. That's why no matter what's going on in our day and age, no matter what's going on in the world around us, if we seek God first, seek him, his kingdom, and his righteousness, we don't have to worry that our needs will not be met. We just have to keep the course, and no matter what's going on in the world around us, keep seeking God, seeking his kingdom, seeking his righteousness. What does it mean to seek first his kingdom? If God is a shepherd, it means as a sheep that we are to join his flock and to follow after him. You know, and this is the wonderful part. If we follow him, he becomes our shepherd. He takes responsibility for my needs. And I love that. I love the thought that God takes responsibility for the things that I need when I belong to him. And that means that I should never worry again. In a perfect world, in a perfect existence, I wouldn't. It still creeps in from time to time, but I shouldn't. I should not worry. I should have faith. God is going to always take care of my needs. You know, I see this vividly. I see this vividly in my children. That's why I know it's possible, because my kids have zero doubts that 100% of their needs will be met. It's just an automatic belief they have. They know that all their needs will be met. We should have more. We should have faith like that, and we should have more faith in God that our needs are going to be taken care of. Verse number 2. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Verse 2 simply saying of God as a shepherd, he gives me what I need. Not necessarily what I want, he gives me what I need. Much more important. And we don't like this language. He makes me lie down in green pastures. We don't like that language, but that's really true of God. If it wasn't true, David wouldn't have written it. And it's what every good shepherd does. A good shepherd lets the sheep have some freedom, but he also makes them do certain things. He also leads them in particular ways for their own benefit, and that's what God does for us. Matthew 18:12-14, Jesus said, "What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that is straying? If it turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 which have not gone astray. So it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish." Something that's not in the story. And it's something I've taught before, and I'd like to make a correction to some past teaching. And in the past teaching, I've taught that when the shepherd goes after that lost lamb and he finds that lost sheep, I was taught, because I've read it in multiple commentaries, that the shepherd would break the leg of the lamb. You know what? Someone asked me about that recently, and I did some research into that. And even though it's written in many commentaries, I couldn't find the source that said that the shepherd broke the leg of the lamb. And as I researched that even deeper and to try to search for where did that information come from, here's what I found. Shepherds, in fact, did not break the leg of the lamb. But what it said is that they would hobble the leg of the lamb. Now, in Eastern culture, a lot of times they will say that a shepherd would say that he did a break to the leg of the lamb. But when he says break, he means it is B-R-A-K-E, not B-R-E-A-K. So he's not breaking the leg, he's putting a break on the leg, which we would call it a hobble. And that makes sense. But here's the point of the whole thing. Regardless of that, the point's the same. What the shepherd would do is he would disable that sheep from being able to wander away again. Well, that put a considerable more burden on the shepherd, because he had to help that sheep along a lot more. But in the meantime, as he's helping that sheep along, the sheep grew more accustomed to the shepherd. He learned his voice. He learned to trust the shepherd. He learned to love the shepherd. And God will do the exact same thing for you in your life. Sometimes God will put a hobble on you in order for you to get to know him better, in order for you to learn to trust him more, to have a greater intimacy, so that you won't wander off like you have in the past. The next part, he leads me beside quiet waters. And how wonderful does that sound? Another translation reads this: he leads me beside waters of rest. And I just love that. And have you ever noticed, too, when we sing our songs at church, how many hymns reference rest, and how often rest comes along in the Bible? And rest, who doesn't desire rest other than children? My children don't desire rest at all. It's a bad word for them when they hear rest time. But what adult doesn't desire rest? I mean, rest is just such a wonderful picture, and that's something that God gives us when we enter into his rest. Verse 3, the first line of verse 3, he restores my soul. That's part of his work as a shepherd. He restores my soul. What does it mean to restore something? What does it mean to have your soul restored? Some of you know something about restoring a car. I don't personally, but some of you do. What does it mean to restore a car? Well, it means to take something that's not valuable and to give it value. It's to take something that is old and not functionable and make it nice and new, like new and functionable. It's to take something that's worn out and to give it refreshment. And forget about the car now. This is what David says God does to your soul. And man, what a wonderful sight! What a wonderful thought that is, of God restoring my soul like a person would restore an old car. That's just a wonderful thought. And what does that look like when God does that? Well, it means that He gives me joy and peace in the midst of difficulty. He gives me contentment with what I have, where I'm not always desiring something more or something different. He gives me pleasure from service. He gives me pleasure from helping others instead of being served myself. He teaches me where true joy and contentment and happiness comes from. It comes from Him. The second line of verse 3, He guides me in the paths of righteousness. He requires a more difficult path than what I would choose. He leads me along a more difficult path than the one that I would pick for myself. Well, which one would I pick? Well, I tend to lean toward the path of least resistance, but God doesn't always allow me to do that, and I'm always grateful that He doesn't. I'm sure God would appreciate it more if I leaned more towards paths that weren't always the easiest, but that's kind of been my tendency over the years. But He requires me to take a more difficult path, and that makes life so much more richer and more wonderful from what I learn along the journey. It's greater and better due to the difficulty. It's like hiking the Grand Canyon. You all have heard me all mention it many times before, but a few people can attest to it in the church now, that the hike, it is so incredibly difficult, but it has such a huge payoff when you do it, when you actually experience all of it. It's super hard, but it's such an exhilarating thing to finish it and to look back on it and have the wonderful memory of what you've done. Life with God is so much better than even that. The last line there of verse 3, He does these things. He guides me in the paths of righteousness. Why? For His name's sake. For His name's sake. And here's the most important thing for us to get, and we have to understand this. Why does God take care of my needs? Why does God lovingly discipline me? Why does He provide peace and rest for my soul? Why does God guide me in life? Why does God save me? He does it all for His name's sake, for His glory. The fool will think wrongly of God. Will think that something is like vain or egotistical about God. It's not at all. God is our creator. We have no right to think anything except for praiseworthy and wonderful and admonishing thoughts about God. He didn't have to create us. He didn't. Think about that. Dwell on that. He did not have to create you, but He did. He did not have to love you, but He did. He chose to. And He did not have to save you. Sometimes I think people think that God had to save us, that He owed it to us or something. He didn't. He's the creator. He can do whatever He chooses. He's God. But He chose these wonderful things. And not only the things that He chose cost Him dearly in order to redeem us. Let that be a wonderful thought to us. And He did this because He is great. He did it because He is love. And He's taught us what greatness is. And He's taught us what true love looks like. Verse 4, the first line, Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for You are with me. To us, this scary valley is the most difficult of our life. It's the most difficult circumstances that we will face in our life. And in a very real sense, in David's valley stood a giant called Goliath. But in our valley, we don't necessarily have a giant standing in it, but we have some giants for sure. Our giants in our valley is the death of loved ones. It's job loss. It's disease. It's infertility. It's disappointments. It's heartaches of all kinds. And it's persecution for following after Jesus. That's what lies in our valley. And notice that God doesn't lead us around these difficult valleys. but he leads us through them. He takes us through those valleys. When he is with us, we'll still experience the same difficult things that are common to man, but we will face them differently. We face our valleys with hope and with confidence. Why? Because we know something that other people don't know. We know that they are temporary. Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 15, a passage I absolutely love. It says, Jesus went to a city called Nain, and his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large crowd. Now, as Jesus approached the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a sizable crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her and said to her, "Do not weep." And he came up and touched the coffin, and the bearers came to a halt. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Why would I share that with you? Because I want you to see the power of Jesus. Jesus saw a woman in great distress. She was in real trouble in her day and time. No husband, her only son is dead. That means that she is now completely destitute unless someone takes her in, which is not going to be a likely thing, especially in their poor society. But then Jesus comes along and he changes everything. And I know what some of you may be thinking. You may be thinking, it's all good and well that Jesus did that for her, but he didn't do that for me. My loved one is gone. I say this to you, church. He has not done that for you yet. He has not done that for you yet. Christians have a hope and we have a comfort that nobody else in the world has. Jesus conquered death so that our greatest fear, being death, could be reduced to absolutely nothing. And we can say like Paul in Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Other people will never see death as gain, but Christians do. And if we don't, we should, because it is not a tragedy for a Christian to die and be with God. That is not a tragedy at all. Now, is that sad for us that are here? Yes, absolutely it is, because we love people and we miss our loved ones. But it's not sad for those who belong to Christ. It's not sad to be in the presence of God. It's the best thing in the world you can imagine. Verse 4, the second line, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What were the shepherd's rod and staff? And how do they comfort? Well, the rod is what the shepherd used to protect against danger. Imagine like the old-fashioned like billy club type club that like a police officer carried. That short stick that was like a cudgel, that you could really crack someone's head open with. But imagine the shepherd carried one of those that he would crack, the heads of a bear or a lion even, or and especially like wolves. The shepherd could protect the flock with his rod. Now his staff was different. His staff was a big long cane with a hooked curved end on it, and he could reach out and gently nudge the sheep along with that, and he could even take the hook around that and grab a hold of one of them and pull them a different direction and things like that. And the rod was for discipline. The staff was for guidance. And I, as a sheep, in this instance, when I'm in distress, I look to Jesus. And there he is. Because I am his, I might suffer. I might even die. But death and the devil cannot have me because I belong to him. His rod of discipline and his staff that guides me, they will always bring me comfort. Even when he has to smack me with his rod, which I believe he has from time to time, his comfort is always close behind. Verse 5, David goes on, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. He saves us, He blesses us. He takes care of us. And all in the midst of our enemies. It's like eating dinner, sitting at a big table with all of your enemies surrounding you. He says, this is what you do for me, Lord. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my enemies. Excuse me. Danger and enemies surround us, surround the people of God. And what do the people of God do? They feast. We feast and we celebrate the blessings that God has given us. And we have reason to rejoice. Even when our enemies are surrounding us, we have reason to rejoice always in life when nobody else in the world is rejoicing. Don't allow yourself to get caught up in the things of this world that worry unbelievers. We are different. Stand on God's promises. Count your blessings, stand on God's promises, and maintain your joy. Don't let the world get you swept up in the things going on in the world. Verse 6, and I'll just read the very last verse here and allow it in its wonderful state to stand alone. David finishes imagining this wonderful God that we have as his shepherd. He says, surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. You know, this is the ultimate. When we follow after the Lord our shepherd, he, like a shepherd, causes his goodness and his loving kindness to follow after us all our life. The shepherd is close behind, watching and caring for us all our life. He gives us a joy in this life that no person, that no organization, that no government, no world power can ever take away from us. They cannot take away what is in our heart. Our bodies can be harmed just as the body of Jesus was harmed, just as the body of Paul and the apostles were harmed. But it's of no consequence because our end result, the last line, we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And that's a good thing. And I ask you, church, how wonderful is Jehovah-Raah? How wonderful is God, our shepherd? Until next time, church, love God and love others. I'm Wes LaFleur signing off.